Well, good morning. Hope everyone is having a great Sunday. So, update for the autoflower kitchen experiment. I really haven't done anything this week, any different, so why make a video? Also, still kicking that sinus infections butt. But I do want to talk a little bit about phenotype versus genotype and seedling variation. So in the world of cannabis, we often use words or misuse words like strain or phenotype. And while phenotype does explain the difference in seedling variation, it is slightly different from genotype, which is kind of what we're really describing here. So if you think about a cannabis plant, the seedlings are like brothers and sisters, right? They have a set of parents, but when you're comparing plants to like humans, it's a lot different because plants have such a wide variation in genetic DNA to pull from. So like when the human genome experiment was completed, I think that was like, 2010, I don't know the dates. They thought that the human genome was going to like be this huge, our DNA was just going to be this massive amount of information. And what they found was that plants actually have far more information in their genetic code than humans even. And so this is why we can see so much variation between brothers and sisters or seedlings of a plant. A really great example of this is, sorry, my dog is asking to go outside. Sunday morning, family's home. That's life. Apples, apple seeds. Okay, so think about an apple seed. If you were to plant an apple seed, what would you get from that apple seed? You wouldn't get anything similar. I mean, you might get something similar, but typically it would be such different genetic makeup from seed to seed to seed from the same apple. It wouldn't taste anything alike. It might not even be the same color, texture, anything like that. And so that's why most of our commercial apples and fruits are, fruit trees are grafted and cloned. And so we use a lot of clones in cannabis, right? Especially in commercial cultivation for that genetic uniformity. So things that we're looking for in cannabis, specifically, internodal spacing, color, smell, yield, growth cycle, right? When they start to when they go into flower, how long they're in flower. So we can see slight variations from seedling to seedling. And the thing with autoflowers is we don't have clones of autoflowers, right? We can't keep them in a vegetative cycle. So no matter what, they're gonna go into flower and we get what we get. Don't throw a fit. I am seeing two distinct variations in my seedlings. So I got a 5-pack of the Alaskan banana berry seeds from Seedspin. And the things that I'm noticing between my two different variations are what I would describe as genotype variation. Now, phenotype variation is very similar to genotype, but it also takes into account the environmental differences that are being used to grow that plant. So when we have, let's say this Alaskan banana berry, if I was to grow this in my indoor room where there's different lights, in a different size container, a different medium, it would have an influence on what would happen to the plant, how it would look, how it would smell. And so those variations are phenotype variations. Genotype is strictly the genetic difference from seedling to seedling. So when I have these two different plants that look vastly different, but they have the exact same container, soil, they've been fed the exact same, the same lights, those are going to show you genotype variations. I wrote an article about this for the Humboldt Seed Company. I'm not sure if it's published yet, but I will link it in the show notes once it is. But I just want to give you guys an idea and an example, and so you guys can see the genotype variation between my two plants. Let me grab my phone. Okay, so here we have one of the Alaskan banana berries, and look at how far apart those nodes are spaced, right? Okay, now this is, I think that nodes, right, are these anywhere a stem, a branch is coming out. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 nodes on this plant, and they're over an inch to 2 inches apart. And then when we go to this plant, look at this. This is the same Alaskan banana berry, and it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 nodes as well. Let's step back so you can see those next to each other. You see that? This has much tighter internodal spacing. So I would say that it is 1/2 inch to 1 inch of internodal spacing. So those are the exact same seed or strains, cultivars, cultivated varieties, and they're grown in the exact same environmental conditions. So that wouldn't be phenotype variation, that would be genotype variation. If I was to grow these somewhere else with different environmental factors, the differences that we would see there would be the phenotype variation. So what can you expect when you see these variations in your seedlings? Or they're clues, right? They're gonna give you clues about how this plant is going to turn out. So for instance, with the thicker internodal spacing, we can expect that the nugs are gonna be growing further apart. This can be good or bad. In my case, I would say that this is going to lead to a less yield or a less dense flower. But in instances where humidity is an issue and you really want nice airflow, then perhaps you would want to go for a genotype that has wide, larger internodal spacing. For this one, this is stacked. This is really close, tight internodal spacing. So I can expect that nug is going to be very dense, and we're gonna see one just, thick flower. It's basically going to just be touching. I don't think we're gonna have very much space from nug to nug. We'll see though. We're in about day, I wanna say, almost day 50 of their life cycle, and it's a very slow transition over this last week. Which is good, right? We want to keep them vegging and growing for as long as possible, but next week I will be discussing a little bit of a transition, more into flower and what we can expect for different nutrients. But until then, I'm just keeping an eye on my plants, noticing their genetic differences. And so I have, out of 5 plants, I have 2 that are showing the really tall, long, far spacing. One that's like iffy in between. She's not doing very good. I don't know. She's just a funny gal. She went into flower a lot earlier, and then I have 2 that are really tight internodal spacing. So I'd say 4 out of 5 of the plants are doing really great. It was a complete experiment to be doing it with these silly little lights, and so far they're liking it. I do have to say, from all of the different lights I have set up here, they're $20, $30 lights at most. I just want to see what you can do with things that you order off of Amazon for somebody who is just a beginner. And what I've found is these octopus bendy lights with the 8 arms are my favorite so far. I can adjust them as the plant is growing. They also have full spectrum, red and blue, and any plant that has more of that on it has been showing a lot more growth. So the genetics Grower Mo are Alaskan banana berry autoflowers from Seedsman Genetics. So I'm documenting this for Seedsman. Obviously they send me seeds, I write for them. If you guys haven't checked it out, I love writing. Most of my education content is in writing articles. I blog or write for Seedsman, the Humboldt Seed Company, as well as my Patreon, and all things sustainable cannabis cultivation. But that's really all I had for today. It was just, kind of informing and talking about those differences, phenotype versus genotype. And if I was to grow a plant inside versus outside, those would be phenotypes, right? Completely different phenotypes. Not only do they need to be genetically different, but they also have to have environmental differences that influence the variations that you see from seedling to seedling. And then of course we have clones that are genetically identical. And I always feel like when you grow clones and you have a plant count from your, you know, your state legislation or whatever, you're only allowed to grow 4 or 15. Well, if you're growing in a 4x8 bed outdoors with 8 clones, is it really 8 different plants, or is that, could you argue that it's just one plant, right? I would say you could argue it's one plant. If they were to do to genetic testing, those clones are all the same. Loopholes, right? Yes, I will link to all of my writing for Seedspin, Humboldt Seed Company, and then of course my Patreon. It is paid, but I go into a lot more of the science with my Patreon. For this month, we are working on, we're focusing on calcium. So last month was on sulfate minerals, and this month we're going to be discussing calcium in depth. I like to provide one article and one recipe a month. So this month's recipe is going to be on water-soluble calcium, and I will probably do a video next week, because as we transition and start going into flower, we want to make sure that our plants have sufficient, more than enough calcium. And when we're growing in these small containers, it can be hard to cycle nutrients efficiently when we're relying on organic inputs and living soil. So that's why, you know, when people ask me if I'm growing in living soil, of course I promote living soil. Most of the time, I would prefer native soil. That's true living soil, right? Containers, potting mix, that's not true soil. It doesn't contain nearly the amount of minerals that real soil has. Soil is 45 to 55% minerals. Minerals are the rocks in the ground that are broken down from weathering and erosion, and they're filled with all of those trace minerals that our plants need. When we're growing in living soil potting mix, it's really just the organic fraction. You know, you've got peat or cocoa, aeration with rice hulls, pumice, compost, vermicompost, manure-based compost, forest-based compost. Stay away from forest-based compost or green waste if you can. But when you grow in these small containers, it can be really hard for those minerals to become available to your plant, because you have to cycle them through microbial digestion. So there's ways that you can increase that nutrient cycling, and I will talk about that either next week or the week after, because I'm going to really want to make sure that I have phosphorus available, a lot of phosphorus, for the flowering phase of growth. Really, we talk about boosting our nutrition. Week 4 or 5 is when we see a lot of flower, the nugs really starting to bulk up, right? Week 1 of flower to 3 is typically the stretch. We can see that transition though from week 3 to week 4 of setting nugs, getting more dense, and really making sure that there is enough and a sufficient amount of phosphorus is really important for that. So we'll talk about enzymes and specific enzymes, because what are enzymes? They are catalysts for chemical changes, and enzymes are produced by microorganisms, but when we are growing in small containers, we may not have enough of that biological activity to produce enough enzymes to cycle nutrients fast enough for the plant, to produce enough or make nutrients available quick enough for the plant to really, what it needs at that phase of growth when you're growing such small containers. So you can do things like sprouted seed teas, or introduction of, I use malted barley because it's really high in phosphatases as well as amylase, which are 2 different enzymes. One breaks down carbohydrates into fermentable sugars, which feeds bacteria and other microorganisms. And then phosphatases solubilizes phosphorus, which has a tendency to tie up to soil particles. So that's really important to get your plants, especially in containers, access or putting in more of those enzymes at this time, making sure that they're there and they're cycling nutrients efficiently. And Sugarleaf Organics says that you foliar feed up to day 28, depends on strain, with water-soluble calcium. Yeah, definitely. As long as you can. Like, I would say that most of these plants, I did my foliar feed in the last video last week and this week, so they were both foliar fed, but I did not have the water-soluble calcium ready yet. It's still sitting in vinegar. It needs 3 weeks from Christmas. I was a little behind on getting that, so I could put a video together on how you make it, but it's pretty simple. Eggshells, bake them in the oven, soak them in vinegar for 3 weeks, dilute that, and then you have a soluble calcium. So the thing with calcium though is that calcium is a really large molecule, and there's scientific data that suggests when you foliar feed with large molecules, it has a hard time leaving basically wherever you sprayed it. So it's really like, you want to make sure that you're foliaring it really nicely, getting coverage everywhere. Also, calcium is a cation, so it's positively charged, and leaf surface have negative charges on them, so it's also like really holding onto it, and it's not able to move through the plant as effectively as, let's say, like nitrogen, which is a much smaller molecule than calcium. So because I'm a huge proponent of foliar feeding, but I like to always read the counter argument in scientific papers and see what other scientists are saying for both sides, so that I can get just a grasp, have a better grasp of what is going on in the plant physiologically, biologically, and chemically. So that's just something that I've been pondering, is whether or not foliar feeding calcium is as effective maybe as like other nutrients. And yes, foliar feeding is amazing. Foliar feeding, you can get your plants, especially through the vegetative stage, like kelp and nitrogen. Trace minerals, nitrogen, do really well. They're smaller. They can spread through the plant pretty quickly. You need to look at whether it's a mobile or immobile nutrient, of course, and its solubility in water. But for the most part, foliar feeding does amazing things. And like I said in the last video, silica is something that makes a significant improvement in your plant's health for IPM purposes. While silica is not considered an essential nutrient because a plant can survive without silica, it's silly to think that your plant shouldn't have silica. Its health is much better off when there's silica present. And it's the second most abundant mineral in Earth's freaking crust. Why would you not give your plant silica? It's used to being around a huge amount of silica all the time outside. And don't be afraid of foliar feeding. It's not going to burn your babies. Do light dilution. I typically recommend 50 to 75% of the recommended dosage of all nutrients, because nutrient companies are trying to sell you products. And so they were going to tell you the maximum amount because they want you to keep buying their products. And I'm here to try to help you guys save money, make your own things, use products when needed, but the least amount, and then spray when lights are off, obviously, or early morning or in the evening if you're outside. But spraying your plants can do amazing things, especially for IPM, and you can mix nutrients with an IPM regimen. And I typically use specific microorganisms for IPM that are safe to spray through flower, like trichoderma and bacillus, but we'll talk about that as these plants transition. Thank you guys for tuning in. Sunday morning live stream. I am going to go play with my son and my husband. It's his only day off. And Sugarleaf Organics says, is there another way to break calcium down? I add labs, WSC, Q bark, and spray right, it lights out. Well, you're using the water-soluble calcium, which the vinegar is breaking it down, making it soluble. It's not about it not being like breaking it down, I guess. It's just that the molecule in itself is large and has a positive charge on it, and the leaf surface has a negative charge. So, right, that's like a magnet, it's attracting to itself. But that's not to say that spraying it all over the surface of your plant isn't going to benefit it. It's just possibly not, it's not moving or translocating throughout the plant. But if you're spraying efficiently all over the entire surface of the leaf, the plant, then it's getting calcium wherever it's touching, wherever that spray is touching. And if you haven't, consider switching from yucca, from Q to yucca, just because of the price. And I sell yucca. But thank you, Mr. Django, and thank you guys for supporting. I had a bunch of orders for the yucca extract this week, and I really appreciate that. Also, today is the last day to sign up for the mushroom grow along. I will put the link for that in the description. Again, it is inoculated grains, cocoa coir, vermiculite, and you just have to buy a tub, mix it together, make sure it's sterile, and you could get 2 to 3 flushes of mushrooms out of that. So there's 2 classes that come with it, Discord community for any questions that you might have. It's a great way to introduce yourself to growing mushrooms, which is just a fun, who doesn't love growing more plants, more fungi, more organisms to watch and learn from. So thank you guys, have a great rest of your day, and I will see you Thursday at 5 o'clock. Again, I will link some of the articles in the description, the mushroom grow along in the description, and if you want yucca, I think you can use code YouTube10 or something like that. Thank you guys. Bye.